I'm sure you've heard. And if you haven't, I don't know which closet you've been in. But as these two little guys that are rearranging the stones at Stonehenge, as they are saying, he hates changing for daylight savings time. And so Saturday night, you know, when you crawl in between the sheets, don't forget to make the adjustment. And then if you've got nothing to do next week, I suppose you could fly over and help them rearrange the stones. If you could get near them. Oh. No, we had an interesting week, and started with Friday last, when at 6:45 in the morning I had to be at the Woodbury Clearance Clinic to get my shot. I didn't get lost getting over there, but I fell asleep coming home apparently, because I don't know how I got home. There was some, and then of course traffic jams at that time of the morning, because I'm going the other way. And it just started downhill from there. And when I got here today, I'm going to apologize now, because everybody's listening. When I got here today, I opened up, I have two bags, note bag and video bag. I opened up the video bag, and the video disc I was using last week isn't in there. So I don't have the disc for the Lake District. I've got discs of many different topics, and I've chosen a supplement. So the disc today for you will be different than the topic. But if anybody's watching on TV, because Jeff and the boys have already copied that disc, the people on TV will get the right disc for the show. You'll get the right one down the road. I don't know about next week, because next week could go with next week, and so on and so forth. I will make sure we get it eventually, yes. Oh yeah, well, we'll do that too. And was one other thing I was supposed to, oh, yeah. We have put together, I have put together a proposal that would take me from now until June 10th of next year. 2022. And that proposal has been submitted, and it's open. It could be Zoom presented, or it could be live presented, or it could be a combination. But it has been presented to Thompson Center in West St. Paul, Maplewood, Coon Rapids, Plymouth, and Minnetonka. Now, for those of you who could, no, nothing in Plymouth and Minnetonka overlaps. Nothing is the same. So if you chose to attend both, you would not get the same presentation. Even though what I have done, because Plymouth I think is twice a month, and I think we're twice a month here. What I have done is I've taken a set of discs like the one I'm using currently, and I'm using two of them in Plymouth and two of them in Minnetonka. So if you had the two brochures laying side by side on the table, they might have the same topic. Like landscape mysteries is one of them. Some of the mysteries of why, like the chalk horse, where'd he come from, et cetera, et cetera. If he's in Plymouth, he won't be here. So.
Is Plymouth on Wednesday, Terry?
Plymouth is Wednesday in the morning. It starts at 9:30 and goes until 11:30. And this one speaks for itself. Now, there are a few people, I'm not bending any arms, please, that's not what I'm trying to say, but there are a few people who managed to make it to both classes. For those people, I am very grateful. It makes me feel good. Is Plymouth in person? Plymouth is like this. In other words, I've got a computer sitting here set up for Zoom. And there were, I think, 2 people that were on the Zoom yesterday. And I think there were 6 people, 4, 5, 6 people in the room at the same time. So it could be an either or, is what I'm saying. Now, in regard to what I'm being told, and I've got to admit this is really weird. Most of you know, most of you are aware, I have a position with our congregation, and it is the position of clerk of session, which in a Lutheran congregation that would make me the president of the congregation. But Presbyterianism is a little weird. But what I mean is I have been on the receiving end of all of the direct communication from the governor because I'm responsible on paper. And then I just sort of pass everything along because we have 2 doctors, husband and wife, who have agreed to supervise the building during this mess. And so what I'm getting from them, and you can jot it down, we are looking at 8 people in a room. If both shots have been administered and 2 weeks have gone by. So we're saying 8 plus 4, 2 plus 14. 2 shots plus 14 days. Then 8 people can be in a room without masks. Okay? Now that, through the summer, if the numbers don't build, that probably the number will be increased. It'll probably go something like 8, 12, 16, and then maybe 24. Until that happens, we have to abide by whatever the city ordinances are that we're in. And so if we're in this building, whatever Minnetonka says goes. And if I go through 3.5 miles up the road into Plymouth and it's different ordinances, I can't drag these ordinances up there. Okay? So what you want to do is when those brochures, booklets come around, and I would personally, if you want to register for something or you think you'd like to attend something, call Susan. Is it going to be a live session or is it going to be a Zoom session, or can I pick and choose? And that's what you're doing right now. So that is going to, I think that is going to continue the sharing, the choosing. will probably continue through September or maybe October. The way it's leaning right now, it'll probably, the input that I am receiving from these two doctors says that it'll probably be Christmas before we really have wiped out most of the regulations. Now, it doesn't say we've wiped out the COVID. It means we've pushed it down far enough that we all can get into a room together and, Fran can blow in my ear again. So, all right. So that's all I can tell you at this point. But I have submitted it, and there will be something offered here twice a month through June. No, excuse me, 4 in June. 4 in June, 2 in July, and 2 in August, and then 4 in September again. And then, as most of you are already aware, I knocked it off on June 10th because I wanted a week to recover before I got on the big silver bird, and we're going to spend our 11, 12 days. And by then, there you will have lifted all the quarantines and everything else, so we'll see what happens, huh? Okay. I think I've got everything out of the way, announcement-wise. Now, I shorted last week. I've got a book here, and it's got nothing but National Trust information in it, like how many farms and how many acres and how much is represented by the National Trust. And we can open that up if we choose to. Like, Octavia Hill founded the thing, and Sir Robert Hunter for the protection of commons and public. Hey, we can get into that. But what I find more interesting is in this particular day's topic, we're looking at a different area, and it begins to look like the United States. In that, we have a national park system. And the National Trust is their national park system, but it has more in it, and it operates differently. Now, for an example, let's just look at Yellowstone. And there's flat land at Yellowstone because I see all these pictures with the buffalo walking around on the flat land. Well, if that was in England, the rationale is, they don't have enough land that they can set land aside and just let it sit idle. And so what the National Trust does is it manages that land. In other words, it says we'll raise a crop on that land every 3rd year. We will rotate the crop. And Nancy, if you want to rent that land from us on that year, and you want to plant the crop, and you want to harvest the crop, and then we get a percentage, a tax, that'd be fine by us. And so there are people living in homes that are maybe 300 years old on this land that they have not thrown out of their home. Now, it depends. It depends. Sometimes the land is given to the National Trust, and sometimes the National Trust takes it and then they turn it around, as we found out last week. They turn it around and they rent it back to the previous owner. In other words, the one who donated it, They turn it around. The new owner, if you will, the National Trust, now becomes the caretaker. They're the ones responsible for putting a new roof on the house. They're the ones responsible for any maintenance. All right? So I want to cut to the end, and then we'll backfill. When Beatrix Potter died, she left 4,000 acres of the Lake District to the National Trust. Now, some of that, most of it, are old farm homesteads, ED, that she bought up, she and her husband bought up, and as the people fell on hard times, she had income from Peter Rabbit. And she was not dependent on the hard times. In other words, the Depression. She had a fixed income, kind of like most of you and I now. And so, as the neighboring farmers threw up their hands in despair and said, I've got to get out of here, she was able to buy the land quite inexpensively. And she gave the people what today would be considered a very square shake, because her husband had an inn. Being the lawyer type, he knew when these homes were coming up for sale. And in doing so, he and she would go to the farmer and buy it directly from the farmer, so it never went through the bank, it never went through a land agency. The farm owner got a square shake, and if there were any, let's call them gentlemen's agreements, they were just between neighbors. To me, that opens the door, if you will, to the type of person that Beatrix Potter was. Now, we can go back to the beginning, and we can say Beatrix Potter was a very, very wealthy little girl who was very spoiled. Now, you can do that, but you've got to remember that in 1866, Victoria's influence in London was very strong. This is the way it will be. You will not do this. You will not do that. And so when Beatrix Potter is raised in central London by two, let's call them image-conscious parents, she's going to do this or she's not going to do that. You will wear this ribbon, you won't wear that ribbon. And her best times to get out from under this Elizabethan thumb were when she and her parents went north to the Lake District and had summer with either friends or relatives, she had both, who lived in this area. Because she was out of the imagined London glare, I say imagined because whether it was actually there, whether anybody was actually watching her is up for debate, other than her mother. So when she got up there, she was able to do things that she couldn't do in London, like run in the fields and roll down the hills. As one writer puts it, she was actually able to be a person, a young girl. one of the things that she took home from there was a pet rabbit, who later is what she writes about in a book that we call The Tales of Peter Rabbit. So, was the Lake District responsible for her writing? Most definitely. Now, she and her brother in London, they collected anything they could get their hands on. They had pet rats. They had birds. They would go down the street, or they would go to the nearest green area, and they would pick up anything they could find, and they brought them home, and they, taxidermy-wise, they stuffed them. They had birds. They had mammals. They had fish. And these two just were enwrapped by biology. Now, because of the mother's attitude, these two kids didn't go to school. These two kids had each other, and that was it. So if they didn't know how to socialize, it's understandable. If they had rather a strange sense of values, it's understandable. If they did things which were rather strange, it is understandable. But the piece I want to leave you with is, who taught Beatrix to write? Her father. Who taught Beatrix, and know that there are, I believe, 22 or 23 books here. In most of them, she does all her own watercolor art, illustrated by. Not all of them, because at the end, she lost a lot of the control. Some people say Parkinson's. There's a lot of different input as to what disease she actually came down with. She didn't go anywhere. By the time we're dealing with the end, she lived up in the Lake District, and she had become a recluse. Her appreciation then of nature is what we're looking at. The piece that I've got here is entitled Beatrix Potter, First Conservationist. That's not right. We can't give her credit for that. She is a major contributor. She is definitely instrumental. She devoted the latter part of her life, probably the last 20 years, and all of her fortune to preserving the landscape and farming practices of the Lakes District in northwestern England. By the time of her death, she had written and illustrated 33 books, amassed over 4,000 acres of cultural hill farm property, which she bequeathed to the nation via the National Trust. Okay, so what was she doing? Irony of irony. She wanted to save this area from you and me, the tourists. She wanted to preserve it the way it was. Now, she died in 1943, all right? 1943. For some of us, that's not out of reach. I know that in 1943, my grandmother and grandfather in North Dakota did not have running water. There was a well out there, and a pipe that went into the barn, and a pipe that came into the house. And depending upon which pipe you hooked onto the pump, that's who got the water. I also know that it was great sport on Halloween to go out and tip over the house. Okay. I can remember that in North Dakota, but what I'm going to tell you is in 1942, she did not have running water in her house. She did not have any sewer system. And this is a woman who obviously had money because she bought up 4,000 acres of farmland. She was interested in preserving it the way it was. Not going back in time, but not going forward in time. If you can grab onto that concept. In other words, the way it is right now is the way it will be for the rest of time. We have a term, fell, F-E-L-L. And it's one of those words that fits in many different ways. Depending upon which language you're speaking or which dialect you're speaking, fell is both the names for peaks or mountains, if you will. In Scotland, Scafell Pike Scaffold Pike is England's highest mountain, okay, and it is called a fell, F-E-L-L, generically. And yet, if you go into the just south of Scotland, into the Lake District, that same term is going to be used for a boggy land that's elevated. In other words, when the snow melts and comes off of the hills and goes into a high meadow and the water collects there, that's a fell. So when you're doing your crossword puzzles, F-E-L-L, it's a marsh or a bog land, but it's not down at river level, it's up in the mountains. And I know Scottish mountains are not that high. I mean, they're not going to go much above 3,000 feet. But then they go downhill in a hurry. So they are quite peak, quite sharp. We want to remember that in the 19th century, there's a big push. Think in terms of Wordsworth. Anybody here into Wordsworth? What's he talk about? What's his thrust? I'm sorry? Nature? Countrysides? Beauty of nature? Okay. Does this have an effect on the readers? And so what do the readers want to do? Go to the Lake District and see what Wordsworth is writing about. Wordsworth then, and his writings, are the enemy of Beatrix Potter. She does not want the tourists up there. She does not want the motor cars. She does not want the stinking exhaust. She does not want the gasoline fumes. Her house is heated with wood. well, so what? You know, it's England. It never gets cold. Time out. The Lake District, not quite as cold as we are, no. But it's not uncommon to hit 15, 20 degrees Fahrenheit in the winter. And it will stay there for a couple of weeks because of the elevation. That has a definite effect on what the area can do for itself. Think of it this way. We've got indigenous, I love that word, but I just can't say it. We have indigenous sheep to the area. Okay. Now talk about indigenous cows in Scotland. Let's just make the jump for a second. We'll be back. What does that indigenous cow look like in Scotland? Nancy, do you remember what that cow looks like in Scotland? No? You? Fran? Eddie Coo. Eddie Coo. By your computer. Okay. This is the world's largest teddy bear. Shaggy, long-haired, but pretty even-tempered. They're scarier than all get out because they've got a 7.5 foot span on the horns. They're the Texas Longhorns. But hairy, just dripping with hair. The hair keeps them warm. The sheep in the Lake District shared that same hair. The problem is that's not good wool, good quality wool. It's coarse. It's stiff. It's not soft. I'm sorry? Yeah, that's what I'm saying. The sheep, the wool is coarse like the cow. The sheep, that wool coming off of the sheep is not high quality. And because it's not high quality, yes, you can generate a volume of it, but if it's not good quality, people don't pay much money for it. The weavers. One of the biggest contributions that Beatrix Potter made to this area is the introduction, and it's not easy to do, the introduction of another brand or another breed of sheep mixed with the local. And this is where it gets to be touch and go, because when you mix to get softer wool, you don't have the durability in the winter. So either you have tough wool or dead sheep. And she stuck with it long enough. Now, I don't know if she physically did it herself or if she paid to have it done, but she came up with a whole new breed which could take the Lake District winter as well as being a softer wool that people would pay more money for, so the farmers made more money per head. Okay? Now this is an author. An author of animal stories. This is a woman then who devotes her whole life, because she quits writing maybe 20 years before she dies. And at that time, she's 100% into the Lake District and this new breed of sheep. But she is there. She is there and she is committed. And she is going to be there. I can't come up with another word, but she is going to be revered in that area because of the conservation, and that's the best word I can find. And I'm not saying she sat on everything. She, in some cases you'd say, well, boy, wouldn't you like running water and wouldn't you like a sewer system and all that kind of stuff? But no, she didn't need that. We know that she, in 1914, she physically said, "Mom, we're moving." And she and her mother moved to the Lake District, and they moved to a place called Castle Farm. Bob, that's not the place you decided to make an impression. Okay? Yeah, that was Hilltop. Okay? Yeah, now Peter Rapid was in the backyard, yes. But Hilltop is a home. And it was her home. No, it was in the air. Down there from Hilltop, if you're standing and you look out across the street and out across the pasture, there's another house. That's her home. But as you can imagine, that's a shrine. Okay? And you just don't get in there without an appointment. I mean, this is not a tourist's home. And the people who own it privately. It is not a public museum. So no, we didn't get in there. But within a quarter of a mile, there is this home which has been massaged into being her home. And it for all intents and purposes, Hilltop then is, this is Beatrix Potter's home, this is where she did this is, no. Time out. Tourist trap. That's not her home, she didn't live there. And the farm is up the road. So that home is a tourist center. And it is in keeping with everything she said. I don't want tourists in my home. I don't want tourists in my backyard. And they're not. They're down the road in somebody else's, down toward the center of town, where there's already more people. And so even today, her wishes are being kept, honored. Oh, here, just in case. If you're into animals, the breed of sheep that she developed, the breed that she started with is Herdwick. Herdwick is the natural, the normal, the indigenous. And Herdwicks produce a coarse wool useful only for carpets. And so this is the one she, shall we say, worked on, transformed. Yeah. Now we want to not forget. Yeah. I'm going to borrow this book. Because on the bottom it says, published by Frederick Warne and Company. W-A-R-N-E. It's got it here also. I'm reading off the back. I'm cheating. But Frederick Warne didn't think these books were any good. Frederick Warne had a set of these in black and white, and he said, they're no good. Maybe if we put some color into them. So he had her go back and add watercolors. But she did not want to add the watercolors. No. Why? Because if she kept them in black and white, and she kept them at quarter page, more small children could afford them. So when you open this book up and you see colored pictures in it, this is not one of the original 250 that she paid for herself. And they were printed in black and white. Now, she got into a big tussle with Warne. And Warne eventually ended up, let's put it this way, padding his pockets enough that he was arrested for fraud. Fraud to her. This is when she met the man at the Lake District who shared her concern for the land and who became her husband. Now, she wanted to preserve a particular quality of the environment and its associated way of life as she had first encountered them. A unique, rather inefficient rural economy rather than a set of natural habitat. At her death, the total estate of farms, 128 farms, was valued at £211,000, between 14 and 35 million pounds today. Beatrix Potter's land is now a central part of the National Trust's contribution to the Lake District, which at 885 square miles is England's largest and most popular scenic reserve. Ironically, her fame now swells the tourism and threatens to overwhelm the land she works to save. Okay.
And I'm sure plumbing and so forth has been added to that property.
Oh, I'm sure. If I go back to the other book and we bring up the Lake District, you will, yes, there's a substantial amount that has been added. I think it's interesting. On her death, correction. On her death, she left 14 farms with 4,000 acres to the National Trust, a conservation body, co-founded in 1895. Yeah, okay, we got that. Bequest was one of the largest, which now makes up 128,000 acre Lake District National Park, visited by 11 million people every year. So, I don't know, did she do a good job or did Wordsworth? Okay. There are, there's a, where is it? Doo-doo. Yeah. She never, to me, was very worldly. There's a picture of her here. She must be 30, maybe 35. And dark clothes, straw hat. Straw hat's fraying around the edge, so it's not its first summer. But she's standing in the doorway of your house. So, but now remember, she's standing in the doorway of that house. That's the house that today is considered Hilltop. So she must have visited that house. She must have had some contacts with that house.
I think the guide told us she entertained people there. That's where she received her visitors. But she lived out in town, and if they found out she lived there and tried to visit her there, she'd go out the back door up over the hills and through the pastures to get away from them.
Yeah.
Didn't want to deal with them.
Very definitely eccentric. Well, we may have to do some math here. He's born in 1866, died in 1943. So 80. If you care, Beatrix is not her name. It's not her first name. She was christened Helen, but Beatrix is her middle name. I don't know of any other Beatrixes, do you? Oh, okay. Peter was based on a real rabbit, yeah. Potter's house was basically a menagerie, yeah. Peter Rabbit wasn't an immediate success. No, it wasn't, and the publisher said it's because it's in black and white. But she had paid for it herself, so he really didn't care. She understood merchandising. She made her own Peter Rabbit doll, which she registered at the patent office. So if you're lucky enough, Nancy, next time you go to a garage sale, look for that Peter Rabbit doll, will you? I'll even pay you 50 cents extra. Now, what do we know about this period of time? Because it fits her to a T. And that very simply, I got Charles over here and I got Bob over here, and I'm going to run and hide because they're the only ones who know anything. She was considered dumb, D-U-M-B, by her parents. She disappointed her mother. She was a naturalist at a time when women weren't to be educated. One of the reasons she was educated at home because that she would deviate from her mother's lessons. To write. Probably. Yes. Yeah. But what level is the tutor teaching to?
Right, because she was only like 3 years old or something.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Now let's also know that between 1881 and 1897, so let's give her 16 years, she kept a journal in which she jotted down her private thoughts in a secret code. The code was so fiendishly difficult, it was not cracked and or translated until 1958. 40-some years. She died in 43, so that'd be 15 years after her death to crack the code for an uneducated woman. It doesn't say who cracked it. The last book, and she was very good at this, so I guess we'll give her credit. The Tale of Kitty in Boots. Not kitten boots, but Kitty in Boots. Was one that disappeared. They couldn't find it. It was rediscovered in 2013. And it was only discovered hiding at the Victoria and Albert Museum. It was safe, just nobody knew it was there. Discovered a sketch of Kitty in question, plus a rough layout of the unedited manuscript. The story was published with supplementary illustrations by Quentin Blake in 2016. 2016. For her efforts with the sheep, Potter was an award-winning sheep farmer, and in 1943, it's important, was the first woman elected president of the Herdwick Sheep Breeders Association, but died before she took office. In that area, yes, it is. That is what. That. Excuse me, friend. I don't have that in here. It just we'd have to do some digging on that one. Yeah, yeah. And that, oh, never mind. Now, according to this, there is a new National Trust exhibit on the shores of Derwentwater. Now, that's not the river, okay. Where the writer spent vacations and set the tale of Squirrel Nutkin, Lots of people know her as a writer, but she was more of a landowner and farmer in her latter years. I think if we have to carry an image, let's carry that image. She did write, sure. Got nice little books here. And they're little because that's the way she wanted them. So that children could handle them. So that children could carry them. So children could afford them.
They're a good size too for reading at night to your grandchildren. Oh yeah, because they're not too long.
And each one of those, Benjamin Bunny, The Tale of Two Bad Mice, Mrs. Tiggy Winkle, Jeremy Fisher, Tom Kitten, Jemima Puddle Duck, The Tale of Mrs. Tittlemouse, The Tale of Timmy Tiptoes, The Tale of Johnny Town Mouse, The Tale of Mr. Todd, Tale of Pigling Bland, Samuel Whiskers, The Tale of the Pie and the Patty Pans, Tale of Ginger and Pickles. They're all animals that she was familiar with, I guess is the best way to say it. Yes, some of them were stuffed and sitting on the desk in front of her. But others, especially Peter, was a live rabbit, and she had a harness for it, and she would, when she was young, there's a picture of her about that tall, and she's got the rabbit on a leash in London, and they're going for a walk. Yes. When people when people offer things to the National Trust, does the National Trust ever turn them down? It has to. If people started donating, quote, old stuff, there wouldn't be anything left. The average house in the villages is probably 200 years old. And if that poor house happens to have a thatched roof, the value of the house is exponentially raised. It's not doubled, it's quadrupled because of the thatched roof. But the law says if it's got a thatched roof on it, you have to replace it with a thatched roof. You can't change it to a steel roof. You can't change it to a tile roof. You have to keep it. So when you look at that house as a prospective buyer, it definitely comes into play of, now a thatched roof, if it's put on correctly, will last 25, 30 years, which is about what one of our asphalt roofs will last. The difference is the cost of replacing the thatch. Now you replace it, you bring in, I'm sorry, but you bring in relatively unskilled labor to take the old roof off of your asphalt roof. You bring in a truck, they put a conveyor belt up to your roof, and all of a sudden they're up there with hammers or nailing guns or something, and it's boom, 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 and they're done. Thatched roof is anywhere from 18 to 20 inches thick. This way, I suppose. And a thatched roof is a magnet for birds. Well, but the birds are the worst because the birds get in and they pull out the thatch. And so the thatch is great when you say thatched roof, except that what you and I don't see is that that whole thatched roof is covered with chicken wire. Those little octagonal, six-sided squares, you know, and that whole roof is covered with this wire to keep the birds out. So they don't nest in there, so they don't pull the And then, if you ever noticed, please do, if next you ever see it, there's almost always a ceramic cat on the top of the roof of a thatched roof for just that very reason. The ceramic cat up there is up there to protect the roof from the birds. They might, but whatever they put up there has to be a scarecrow. It has to be enough to keep the birds from burrowing into the roof. Now they do, because you can't see it, they do now put a rubber membrane under the thatch. On top of the house, beneath the thatch, they put in a rubber membrane. They didn't used to because, hey, they didn't have that much rubber. And it's probably not rubber, it's probably plastic. But if you want to see one, I know where we can find some because of the laws. The Lake District has more thatch roofs than any other area. For obvious reasons. Or at least they're obvious now.
The rubber membrane is good too because it keeps insects from dropping down into the rooms.
Right. Yeah.
That's a big problem in Africa.
There's a story, don't know how accurate it is, but in some of these cases where when they had a thatched roof, they would just put the poles up and then they'd put the thatching on. And the animals, like the cats, at night would curl up in the thatch because the thatch was warm until it rained. And when it rained, the whole point of the thatch is to deflect the water. But if the animals have pulled enough thatch out, it doesn't deflect, it just goes straight through. And the animals then bail out. And I don't know if it's true, but you can take it home and you can have fun with it. This is where the term raining cats and dogs comes from, because the animals would come out of the holes in the thatch.
From magnificent country houses to monastic ruins.
These are the landmarks and treasures that reveal our rich heritage and history.
Grand country estates to the factories at the heart of our industrial revolution.
These are the buildings, landscapes and stories that uncover Britain's amazing past.
It really is living, breathing, isn't it?
From the wilds of Snowdonia to the dramatic Dorset coast, join me and a host of celebrities with a passion for the past as we explore the riches, treasures and secrets of one of our most loved institutions, the National Trust. From the prehistoric
I have never found anything like this.
to the present day,
Congratulations.
the Trust has given us behind-the-scenes and below-stairs access
Are we going right to the ground?
to some of its finest buildings and locations.
There was gold under these hills.
We'll meet the people keeping our historic traditions alive.
Incredible!
And the experts revealing the lives of those who shaped our past.
Oh, look at that. It really is a treasure house.
This is our heritage, our history. Welcome to the secrets of the National Trust.
Today, we're in the Lake District, a place that inspired one of the best-selling children's authors of all time, Beatrix Potter.
Because hidden behind her famous tales lies a real life story of how a formidable woman
She was unsqueamish enough to actually skin him.
abandoned her hugely successful writing career
The thing about Beatrix was that she was becoming not just an author, but a brand.
and exploited her character's fame to become the Lake District's greatest guardian.
This managed to make sure that all that out there
would be preserved for the nation.
Also, Joan Bakewell travels back to where the National Trust first began.
The first part of the jigsaw.
Oz Clarke finds his way into a top-secret nursery in search of some of the rarest plants on Earth.
You got barbed wire on the fence.
You do get some crazy people who are plant collectors.
And Susanna Lipscomb is witnessing how the preservation of a coastline helped save a species.
Oh, I think I see one or two.
But before all that,
This is the village of Nearsori in Cumbria. There's not a lot here, a couple of dozen houses and a village pub, but this is where some of the most famous children's book characters in the world came to life, and they're books that I absolutely loved as a boy.
known as the Little Tales, they were a series of 23 books. Colourful stories about the lives of human-like animals, offering a quintessential view of English life. And it's here, on the streets of Nearsori, that Beatrix Potter found inspiration for the stories and pictures that fill the pages of her books.
While our characters were having adventures outside the local pub, their creator was busy writing her next tale in the house next door.
Nestled in the centre of the village, up this long garden path, sits Hilltop Farm. A rather unassuming 17th century cottage, once part of a 34-acre working farm. Bought as a holiday home by Beatrix Potter in 1905, with the proceeds from her first 5 books. But if you know where to look, it's so much more than your average farmhouse. Because around each corner lies a familiar scene.
Of a garden and a farmyard. It's very atmospheric. It feels as though she's still here. You know, she must have woken up in the morning in that bed and sun streaming in through the window, looked out on her lakeland garden and thought, ooh, I think I'll send Jemima Puddle Duck down there today, by that gate.
Beatrix's career as an author began in 1902 with The Tale of Peter Rabbit. The book was filled with page upon page of Beatrix's own hand-drawn images of animals. And it's how she managed to create these lifelike drawings that gives us our first glimpse of the real Beatrix Potter. House and Collections Manager Liz Hunter McFarlane explains the macabre lengths the young Potter went to.
She was renowned for her accuracy in portraying animals anatomically and plants and flowers, from my point of view. How did she get that accuracy?
Well, from being quite young, when they were on their holidays on the Scottish estates, she and her brother would bribe the gamekeepers to bring them animals that they could then dissect.
Dead animals?
Absolutely. She saw herself as an artist in training and a scientist. She was somebody who was interested in how these animals worked, and she wanted to know from the inside out.
But it was her pet rabbit who'd inspired her to create her first books, copying his markings exactly to reproduce her fictional character. But when that pet rabbit died, she faced a problem.
I'm now wondering what this rabbit Pelt's doing here, and I'm beginning to suspect.
This is the pelt of Benjamin Bunny. And Benjamin was one of Beatrix's favourite pet rabbits. And
So this is
Benjamin.
Beatrix.
Yeah,
rabbit.
absolutely. Benjamin Bounce.
She was unsqueamish enough to actually skin him herself?
Yes, absolutely. And this was a purely practical solution to a problem that she had, which was Benjamin had been such a good model for her, and the markings on him are so beautiful and so distinctive that when she wanted to make the sequel, what was she to do?
Gosh, hello, Peter. I'm wearing blue.
Beatrix Potter's approach to life and the subsequent success of her much-loved character Peter Rabbit would make her one of the most famous authors of all time. But in truth, a career as a writer wasn't what she wanted at all. While living in London, Beatrix Potter had bought Hilltop Farm with the proceeds of her first 5 books and used these buildings and streets for inspiration. But behind the chirpy, playful children's tales that had made her famous, a darker chapter of her life was unfolding. Author Sarah Gristwood is an expert on Beatrix Potter.
The kitchen, I mean, this is the heart of the house, really, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. Well, it would have been of an old farmhouse,
Yeah.
absolutely.
What was the stage in her life when she came here, then, to live?
Well, she was at a real, what she'd hoped would be a turning point. She'd published half a dozen of the little books already, but she'd just suffered a huge personal tragedy.
Beatrix had become engaged to her publisher, Norman Warne. But sadly, less than a month after his proposal, Norman died of leukemia. It was a crushing blow for Beatrix, who saw Norman as the start of a new direction in her life. Without him, she'd have no choice but to remain in London with her parents, escaping to Hilltop to write.
She was under a great cloud when she came here, looking
Yeah.
for release in a way, I
Yes,
suppose.
exactly that. I think this place was a huge help to her that way, and perhaps that's partly why it became so important to her.
Just to put her into perspective, I mean, was she the sort of J.K. Rowling of her day then, or is that not quite as big as that? How successful was she at that point?
Well, no, I think J.K. Rowling's actually a very good comparison, because, of course, the thing about Beatrix was that she was becoming not just an author, but a brand. And so she really was becoming almost a trademark, the 2 tales a year.
Very savvy.
Very savvy businesswoman.
But Beatrix had been brought up as a Victorian daughter, and until she married, her dream of living in the Lake District would have to wait.
Even though she was rising 40, a successful author, becoming a wealthy woman, she was still a Victorian daughter at home who, until she married, was expected to stay there and help take care of her ageing parents.
At the same time as Beatrix Potter was having to cope with the obligations placed upon her by Victorian England, across the country, attitudes towards wildlife and conservation were beginning to undergo a remarkable change. Britain had begun to preserve the environment. Historian Susanna Lipscomb is on the Norfolk coast, an area rich in natural history, but whose value wasn't realised until it was almost too late.
This is Blakeney Point, 6.5 kilometres of shingle spit made up of sand dunes and salt marshes. An idyllic place for both wildlife and people. And home to one of the most surprising legacies of the Victorian era.
This is the National Trust Remote Research Outpost. For over 100 years, this converted lifeboat station has led the way in nature research and conservation.
It might seem obvious today, but in the late 19th century, people were seemingly oblivious to the damage they were inflicting on the world around them. Here on the point, with no legislation to stop them, shooting parties and local fishermen had free run, decimating the seal and bird population.
But in 1912, the National Trust took over the site, declaring it a nature reserve, dedicated to the protection and research of the precious flora and fauna.
Scientists began studying the local wildlife, working out how best to protect it. But fishermen believed that unless the hunting of seals was allowed to continue, fish stocks would be at risk. The local seal population was in grave danger.
Hello, Susanna.
Lovely to meet you.
Lovely morning.
I'm looking forward to this.
I'm with the Trust's coastal ranger, Ajay Tagala.
So where are we headed now?
We're heading to the western end of the shingle spit. So behind us, we've got 4 miles of shingle and then the sand dunes at the end, and we're heading to the very end where the seals should be.
It wasn't until the 1970s, when numbers had plummeted, that a protection law was finally passed and the seal population was allowed to recover.
We're going at high tide, so we should see lots of them nice and close.
The seals have spent the day hunting at sea, but as the tide retreats and the sandbank is revealed, they've returned to digest their food.
Let's see if I can get... There we go. Oh, it's a hard life, isn't it, lying on the sun? Look how... They look so sweet.
They are sweet little things, yeah.
When the Trust first took over, this beach was virtually empty. But thanks to the protection of their habitat and the work of Ajay and many rangers before him, this is now the UK's largest seal colony.
You can see there's quite a few youngsters, which shows they've had a good breeding season this year, good survival of the young, so that's a really good sign.
Oh, wow, look at all of them. They're amazing. So how many do you have here?
We often have over 1,000. We're at about 500 in total at the moment.
Okay.
But numbers are fluctuating. They're moving all around the sea.
Ah, okay.
So they're very mobile.
Why is it so important to count them?
It's important because it gives us an understanding of population dynamics, and with them being top of the food chain, it's an indication of health of the ocean and the fish as well.
Had it not been for a change in attitudes over a century ago, and the start of conservation as we know it, this seal colony and many of the other precious species might not be here today.
Back in the Lake District, Beatrix Potter continued to visit Hilltop, but only for a few days at a time.
She must have written and illustrated more books when she came here, because I recognise the pattern on the bottom of that dresser from one of the books.
Yeah, you absolutely do. And you can see how she took a huge pleasure in using this house and the village for copy. And she actually wrote about that, how that kitchen range behind you, she wasn't wild about it, but she couldn't replace it. She needed it for the next book. That was Tom Kitten.
The Tale of Tom Kitten was Beatrix Potter's 11th and most lucrative book to date. Her writing career was flourishing, but her attention was elsewhere. And with the help of local solicitor William Heelis, she'd acquired a new focus, buying up key pockets of land around the village. The couple soon became engaged, and Beatrix was finally able to escape London and begin the life she'd always wanted to live.
So when she did marry, when she did come and live here permanently, she then changed from being an illustrator and a writer of children's stories to being a farmer.
What really fascinated me about Beatrix Potter is that her life fell into 3 completely different stages. And what we think of, the writer of the little tales, was really only quite a small part of it. When she married in 1913, her life changed completely. She was Mrs. Heelis. She didn't want to be even called Miss Potter, Beatrix Potter, anymore. She was a farmer, and that's what she wanted to do for the next 30 years that remained to her.
But becoming a farmer was just the beginning of a life she'd been planning since she was a teenager. I'm heading for the shores of Lake Windermere, the location of a childhood summer holiday and a meeting with a man who would change her life forever. Here to show me round is Hilltop's house and collections manager, Liz Hunter-McFarlane.
I've seen a photograph of Beatrix and her family standing in front of this castle. What is it?
This is Ray Castle, and it was rented out, and Beatrix and her family took it for the summer of 1882.
Now, this is where she met Canon Rawnsley. Now, Canon Rawnsley is a big figure in the National Trust. Tell me about him.
Canon Rawnsley was the most charismatic character, and Anybody would have been bowled over by him. Rawnsley came from a sort of a line of people who were starting to think about the preservation of the Lake District, the caring for this part of the world, this cultural landscape, and he recognised the threats that were coming from road builders and the railways, and he would talk to anybody who would listen and try and explain to them the dangers of losing the way of life here.
Little did they know, this chance encounter at Ray Castle would affect this part of the world forever.
So she was indoctrinated with this, in effect, at a very early and impressionable age, and carried it with her throughout her life, the importance of keeping this amazing scenery. I mean, when she must have looked out across that view, who could fail not to want to cherish that? The fells with the sun on them, it really makes you want to hang on to this, doesn't it, as a landscape? It's glorious.
Absolutely.
But Beatrix's new friend, Canon Rawnsley, was more than just a passionate speaker. He had ambitions of founding one of the largest landowning organisations in the country. Joan Bakewell has put on a life jacket and gone to visit the place which inspired it all.
I'm on Grasmere in the Lake District. I have to say, on a golden morning like this, you don't need an excuse to head for this very beautiful little island. But there is something else about this island. It's the spark that helps in the creation of the National Trust.
Canon Rawnsley adored Lake Grasmere, in particular, its island in the middle. But in 1893, this island was put up for sale, not only putting it at risk from developers, but making it out of bounds to Rawnsley and the general public. Without money or a legal foundation, Rawnsley was powerless to stop the sale. As historian Merlin Waterson explains, Rawnsley was going to need some help.
There were three founders of the trust. There was Canon Rawnsley, and then there was Octavia Hill and Robert Hunter. Octavia Hill had all these influential friends and was able to generate a lot of support that way. But Robert Hunter was the genius who realised how you could create a body which had these statutory powers.
Their plan was to acquire vulnerable land and buildings, protecting them from the ever-increasing threats of the Industrial Revolution and keeping them open to the public. But it wasn't going to be easy.
How did he get the money together?
Octavia Hill was very clever at raising money. She had a lot of very influential friends, and when these inaugural meetings were taking place, very well-heeled people came, and people with real political influence. So she brought that to the party.
The renowned social activist's list of contacts went deep into London's high society. Such names as the first Duke of Westminster, Queen Victoria's daughter Princess Louise, and one Helen Beatrix Potter, one of the fledgling trust's major donors. The trust soon set about acquiring more land and has since become one of Britain's largest landowners. With over 600,000 acres, more than 300 properties, and 775 miles of British coastline on its books. And the story has come full circle, because in just the last few months, this island has finally been donated to the trust.
Well, here I am.
Allowing Grasmere's manager, Dave Almond, and I to head back to where it all began.
I think it would be lovely and so fitting under this spreading oak tree.
To mark out the next chapter in its life.
Rightio, that's very good. So if you like to just stand back a bit, I'll give it a bit of a wallop.
One that will allow public access to it forever. One can only imagine how thrilled Canon Rawnsley would be.
First piece of the jigsaw.
It's really extraordinary. It's taken 120 years
Yep.
to get this island. It was where the idea began.
Yep.
120 years roll by, and we've put it
We've done
back.
it,
It's
yeah.
great.
Yeah.
When Beatrix Potter purchased Hilltop Farm in 1905, Canon Rawnsley's National Trust had been gaining momentum across the UK. Inspired by her old friend's achievements, she vowed to do everything she could to conserve even larger areas of her beloved Lake District. So when Troutbeck Farm was at risk of becoming holiday lets, Beatrix Potter snapped up all 2,000 acres of it. But it wasn't just the income from her book sales that made this possible. Beatrix was a smart businesswoman, decades ahead of her time, and she knew that to achieve her goal, she needed to exploit the commercial power of her much-loved characters.
Didn't she patent Peter Rabbit quite early on?
She did. She created the first Peter Rabbit doll, and in fact there's a photograph of that she sent to the patent office to register her Peter Rabbit doll, and here he is, made with a real rabbit pelt.
Oh, so she made this?
Yeah,
This
the
doll?
bristles from a broom, and lead shot in the feet to weight him down, so very child-friendly. And unfortunately, she couldn't find a British toy manufacturer at the time to produce this doll, so the first Peter Rabbit dolls were made in Germany by Steiff.
Who make the famous teddy bears?
The very famous button in the ear teddies. And so this is one of the very first Steiff Peter Rabbit dolls that appeared on the market.
And if you took that onto the Antiques Roadshow now, I mean, that's worth an awful lot of money, isn't it?
Well, the provenance of this one, of course, makes it worth that little bit more.
Oh, this is hers.
So this belonged to her, yeah.
Gosh. Hello, Peter.
The range of merchandise known to Beatrix as the Little Sideshows was vast, with everything from board games to must-have children's gifts.
She's doing this because she knows he's a money spinner. So, yes, she's writing delightful children's books, but she's got a great business sense as well to do all this.
Absolutely. I mean, Beatrix was the original sort of merchandise guru.
She beat Disney before Disney knew what they were on then, really,
Absolutely.
in terms of this kind of thing.
Yeah. And Peter was the first licensed character. In the later days, she was really pushing her publishers to say, which new Little Sideshows have you got coming out? What are you producing now? She really wanted to make sure that they were making the most of her product.
You know, it's absolutely fascinating to look at the romance of the picture and what's out there and to think that, yes, but this managed to make sure that all that out there that she painted would be preserved for the nation.
Her plan was making her rich, and in 1930, when the Trust couldn't afford to buy over 3,500 acres of the Monk Coniston estate, Beatrix Potter stepped in once again. Age 64, she was finally achieving what she'd set out to do. The purchases gave her power and responsibility in the region, power the National Trust still wields today. Hilltop Farm, the inspiration for many of author Beatrix Potter's most famous stories. But it's outside, in her garden, that one feels a connection with her two most famous characters, Peter Rabbit and his cousin, Benjamin Bunny. If the little rabbits were here today, this is where I'd find them, in Hilltop's garden, cared for by head gardener Peter Tasker. It's his job to keep it just as Beatrix would have had it over 100 years ago.
But round the end of a cucumber frame, whom should he meet? Not Mr. McGregor, but Pete the gardener. Lovely to see. What are you doing?
Just putting out some wallflowers.
Oh, go on then, I can't resist.
Yeah.
Chuck me a few over
I'll give you
here.
a bundle.
I'll keep my hand in.
There we
You
go.
know. Was she a keen gardener, Beatrix Potter, do we know, Pete?
She was a keen gardener. She'd never really done any gardening until she came to Hilltop. But when she got here, she was obviously interested in the natural world and gardens, so she really went to town with Hilltop.
Yeah, because it wasn't the thing that well-brought-up ladies in long frocks did.
It wasn't at all, no. Young ladies of her social standing were basically just encouraged to find a husband, a suitable husband, and that was that. So she kind of railed against that and decided she was going to do all sorts of manual stuff as well.
And, of course, the garden features in so many of the books, Jemima Puddle Duck and the Rhubarb and the Gate,
Yep, we've got Jemima's rhubarb patch behind us, and the main path features in the tale of Tom Kitten. There's a picture of Tom and his sisters in their Sunday best, heading off down the path.
There must be a great pressure on you to keep it looking like it did in her day.
There is. In some ways, it's nice to have these pictures because you can base your design around them.
From your and my point of view, it's lovely that it includes so much gardening within its pages. It's just that we now are branded, all we gardeners, as all being as grumpy as Mr. McGregor.
Well, that's true, yeah. Mr. McGregor didn't do us any favours, really.
He didn't really.
Although I have to say, I think he was justified in a lot of his grumpiness. I think I would have been the same if the rabbits had come and taken all my onions or eaten my lettuces and stuff like that. It can be hard work at times.
Even if they're called Peter.
Even if they're called Peter.
I have to tell you, in my garden, rabbits aren't generally called Peter. They're called something else.
Yes, exactly.
Give us another wallflower.
There you go.
Come springtime, these wallflowers, which Pete and I are tucking in for the winter, will burst into life. But across the UK, many plants face an uncertain future. Oz Clarke is at a secret location to find out more.
This is not exactly your typical National Trust property. Gone are the welcoming smiles, replaced with high fences and razor-sharp barbed wire. It's more like entering a top-secret facility. This is a place that you won't find in any of the Trust's guidebooks. In fact, they prefer to keep the exact location under wraps. And with good reason. This is the home of the most important plant conservation initiative the Trust has ever undertaken. Precious blooms that are considered as valuable as fine paintings or grand, stately homes are brought here. Gathered from the Trust's 200 gardens across the UK, this place ensures the survival of some of their rarest plants. This is a cutting from the Ankerwick yew. That's the tree which saw the Magna Carta being sealed in 1215. And the tree's about 2,500 years old. The Romans hadn't even arrived then. This is our native juniper. Here's the female with the berries. Here is the male. This is the only male of its type in existence. So for the sake of English gin, gotta preserve this. Chris Trimmer is nursery manager and protector of all 8,000 plants growing at this clandestine location. Why is it so secret?
It's basically done for biosecurity reasons. We don't want any nasty pests and diseases getting in. This is why we don't have many visitors.
You got barbed wire on the fence?
Yeah, it's there as a deterrent.
From what?
Do you get some crazy people who are plant collectors?
Something really rare, they'll go and nick it.
Possibly, yeah.
The majority of the work Chris and his team do here is propagation, bringing in rare specimens and growing new ones. Today, I'm helping him repot a critically endangered species of rhododendron from Northern Ireland. So, OK, I've got this jelly.
Yeah, so we just scoop around the outside.
Scoop around the outside, yeah. It's at risk from fatal plant pathogens, which can wipe out whole species.
And that goes into the water here.
Into the water, yep.
Yeah,
so,
okay.
To protect against this, Chris and the team take seeds and cuttings from a healthy plant to create new specimens in case disaster strikes.
Take a pot for me.
Yeah.
Fill up to about 3/4 full.
Last year, this place propagated nearly 2,500 plants for 64 National Trust gardens across the country.
Just press it down like that? Yep.
Right. In time, this seedling too could help save this threatened species. Good luck. It's rare to leave a National Trust property without a stirring of your emotions. And these feelings for me today have been intensified by having a greater understanding of the sense of purpose and of pride at the heart of the Trust's plant conservation agenda.
Back in the Lake District, over 90 years ago, Beatrix Potter was taking on yet another challenge, preserving a local endangered species, the Herdwick sheep. Wool prices had dropped and numbers were declining. The livelihood of Lakeland farms was at risk. Having used her wealth to buy up huge parts of the Lake District, Beatrix was able to protect the traditional farming ways from the large-scale developments of the 20th century. Today, the National Trust has to balance that same farming heritage with tourism and conservation. But for General Manager Jeremy Barlow, getting that balance right isn't always easy.
This was her land, and it's still Herdwick sheep, her sheep, on the fields there at the foot of the fell. It's important to keep it a working landscape, isn't it?
Absolutely, and she really understood that. She wanted this to be a living, working landscape. But the challenge is about how we put the natural environment at the forefront of the agenda, while at the same time making sure that this land continues to be living and working and producing food. Conservation isn't just about preserving things and wrapping them up in cotton wool. It's about managing change.
What are the difficulties that are presented by what you have to offer tourists and making sure this is still a practical landscape? When do you find the difficulty comes there?
Well, see, there are always pressures. With 15 million people coming to the Lake District every year, there are pressures on access, on footpaths. There are issues around the management of things like dogs with livestock all around. It is a really delicate balance.
The Trust is not without its critics. You're sometimes accused of being too muscular. I mean, particularly up in buying tracts of land.
We have to be really sensitive to the way people feel about this. So we have to listen to what local people and people throughout the world who love this landscape and have come here on a regular basis, what they feel about it.
Each year, Hilltop Farm attracts over 100,000 passionate Potter fans from right across the world. During her career, Beatrix Potter published dozens of books, extraordinary tales about the adventurous lives of human-like animals. Such was their popularity that Beatrix was able to create and sell merchandise right across the world, using the profits to buy land for the National Trust. Today, these items have become highly collectible. But rather than collect Hilltop memorabilia, Japan has built its very own replica. It's just north of Tokyo, and it's exactly a third bigger.
Why do you think Japan particularly?
Well, we think it's a number of reasons. We think that because the books were translated into Japanese right from the early days, about 1917 was the first translation. And also, at one point, the books were taught as an English text in schools, so they learnt English from the little books. But also, the stories are the quintessential view of England. I mean, wouldn't you just love England to look like that, you know, everywhere?
And it explains it, because when they come here, it does.
It absolutely does.
Do you think she'd be pleased with what she'd see today? With all these people coming into her little house, with what the Trust is doing in opening it all up?
Well, she was always surprised at how what she called Peter's perennial charm, the fact that people were still interested in the storybooks, even from the time when she first wrote them up until her later years. Who wouldn't be flattered by that kind of attention?
One such fan is Candy Beale, who's travelled all the way from North Carolina in the US.
How passionate are you? I mean, do you collect?
I do. I have all the figurines.
How many have you got now, these
Well,
figurines?
somewhere around the 500 range.
Candy's home is stuffed full of Potter merchandise, with cabinet after cabinet of figurines.
Being rude now, what does one have to pay now for these? What's the most expensive one nowadays?
Several $1,000s. Yes, for Duchess with the flowers. It's very rare because she's on this little pedestal, and many of them broke when they were being made, and so they're very few. So for us, if you can find it, it's about $3,000. Because if you're a serious collector, you have lots of back gems.
That is very serious.
It is very serious.
That is worryingly serious.
And it's costly too.
Beatrix Potter dedicated her life to conserving the Lake District and protecting the farming way of life she saw being threatened. Comedian John Culshaw has been to Snows Hill Manor in Gloucestershire to see how one man's obsession with preserving the past has created a legacy of items that, were it not for him, would have been lost forever.
Now, what is it about unusual, random objects that makes us want to seek them out and hunt them down and collect them? Sometimes en masse, filling the whole house. And then you catalogue them and organise them and put them into a lovely order. Well, I've done this in my time, collecting things from cards from tea bag boxes to beer and whiskey glasses, even a Ford Granada and a Ford Cortina. And if, like me, you like your collecting random and sporadic and beautifully all over the place, then you'll adore what's in this great house here. Every corner that you look there is detailed. It's like an Aladdin's cave in here. Atmosphere packed into every square millimetre. Over 22,000 extraordinary objects, filling every nook and cranny. Drums, hats, boats, coats of arms, flags. There's just everything here. This unbelievable collection is the life's work of one man, architect and artist, Charles Paget Wade. Everything is just scattered in this brilliant way that just fires your imagination. But since Wade's death in 1956, it's fallen to the National Trust to care for it all. Being in here, it's the closest you can get to time travel. Beetles and stick insects. And above, the largest lepidopteran moth in the world. I'm finding out more about this extraordinary man from the Trust's Harriet Groves in the aptly named 100 Wheels Room. This is the kind of Tour de France I would like to see. Look at that. What sort of character was Charles Paget Wade?
He was a very talented artist. He trained as an architect. He used to throw parties for his friends and they'd all dress up in his costume collection. And they'd perform really Victorian Gothic plays. And you can imagine it was quite atmospheric here when he was in. I think he would have been quite an unusual but interesting person to have been around.
Wade's appetite for collecting was prolific. But why is his collection so random?
He bought things that spoke to him, I guess, in a way. That he saw the beauty and the craftsmanship and the design in them. And I think he could really appreciate the work and the time that was spent to make certain objects.
And Wade certainly appreciated clocks. A clock made entirely of wood. I wonder how that sounds when it's working. Maybe like a very ordered, slow woodpecker, something like that. Over 178 clocks and timepieces are scattered throughout the house. Mike Flannery has the wonderful job of keeping them all up and running. And the patient for today is no spring chicken, dating from 1750.
It's a beautiful little clock.
It's gorgeous. Just the one hand there, that's interesting, isn't it?
In the day this was made, this clock would have been set off a sundial. We only had one hand because you didn't need to be any more accurate. Here is the vacuum cleaner.
Every year, this old-timer gets the once-over. And I've been given the rare chance to give Mike a hand.
What we're going to do now is to put a tiny bit of oil on a couple of these parts.
Just a dab of oil on the essential moving parts will keep this centuries-old timepiece running like clockwork.
That's lovely. Beautiful job.
Snow's Hill Manor is filled with objects that have been sadly replaced by the progress of technology. But for me, stepping into the extraordinary world of Charles Paget Wade is the perfect antidote to a busy, demanding and frenetic modern life.
Whether it's rare clocks in Gloucestershire or precious landscapes in Cumbria, history will always remember those who've paused to care for our nation's heritage. And here in the Lakes, one name will always stand out, because by the time Beatrix Potter died in 1943, there'd never been a greater contribution of land to the Trust.
Her legacy to the Lake District is enormous.
It is. I mean, she was uniquely placed to be able to protect areas that were at risk at a time, really, when people weren't recognising the need to protect valleys and the kind of cultural landscape that we have here.
How much did she leave in total?
Well, it was over 4,000 acres by the time she died, so a huge sort of portion of this part of the Lake District that was protected just because she was able to do so.
Beatrix Potter was an author, an illustrator, and a businesswoman, but she'll also be remembered around here for being a great environmentalist long before the term was invented. The Lake District gave her respite and inspiration. In return, she gave us the Lake District. Well, certainly a large part of it.
Next time.
Oh my goodness!
I'm going behind the scenes at Attingham in Shropshire.
Ooh, I was expecting ice cream.
To see how one man blew a family fortune.
Who were they expecting for dinner?
Comedian John Culshaw uncovers a World War II secret.
Oh, then look at this.
And Annika Rice fishes one of the most expensive rivers in the UK.
Just all action.
Are we going right to the ground?
No.
We're down. Oh!
The date as such says August 4th of 1978 in here. And if I flip the book open. I'm just trying to see if I could, here we go. What the Ibsbin. It's got numbers and it says printed in Great Britain, but it doesn't have a date in it. Yeah, for Little Peter in New Zealand. So it got back from New Zealand. Copyright in all countries, signatory to the boon. Yeah, well, that's her other. That's the good lawyer.
It gave me something to look for when I went to estate sales that didn't cost an arm and leg, so I could always justify it to my husband. He had no idea how much I was spending.
Oh, you spent $2 for this one, though. It says so right back here. That's the store's tag on it. No, I don't. No, that says $2 also. So, anyway, that is Arlene's contribution for us today. So, okay. Yeah. Don't forget your daylight savings time.